Today we're going to make a large textured decorative tile to practice glazing on. So you'll need a chunk of clay about the size of a softball, which is a little bit larger than a baseball, and a large canvas or wood board to work on. So first what I'm going to do is wedge the clay. And the clay is soft, but it's not super soft. So when I throw it down, it gives and it changes form. And then what I'm going to do is take my clay and I'm going to start to throw it down so that it flattens out. Okay, so I have my clay on the board, and the board and the clay are both laying horizontally so that they're wider than they are tall. Next I'm going to get what are called guides, and the guides are either plastic or they are made from wood. And when you get two guides, make sure that they match and make sure that their thickness is the same. So they might vary a little bit between the wood and the plastic guides, but just make sure that they are the same. The guides are found in cabinet number 22. Okay, so what I'm going to do to make this tile is a method called slabs. So I'm going to roll a slab of clay out, and a slab is just a flat, even sheet of clay. So I'll put the guides on the side of the clay, not too close, so that the clay is touching the guides, but also not too far away. And I'm actually going to take a piece off because this is a little bit too wide. Just about there, that's perfect. Now I'll take a rolling pin, which is also found in cabinet 22, and I'm going to roll my slab out. So I'm going to keep my rolling pin perpendicular to the guides, so that when I'm rolling the clay out, the clay is getting thinner, and eventually the rolling pin will hit the guide, and the clay won't be able to get any thinner because of that guide on both sides. So you have to press pretty hard. You might need to stand up to do this. If you see rolls or wrinkles in the clay, that means you just need to keep rolling the clay out. And don't let your clay overlap on top of the guide, because then it will not allow you to get an evenly thick tile. Okay, so it looks like my tile is rolled out pretty good. The edges are cracking, but I'm going to trim those off. But I want to make sure that my clay is completely rolled out. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the guides, and I'm going to smooth the clay. So the clay is mostly smooth on the top side from the rolling pin. I'm also going to flip it over and smooth it on the back side. So you can do this one of two ways. You can either use a tool called a scraper, which looks like this. And I'm gently scraping the scraper along the clay to remove the canvas marks made by the canvas board. The other way I can smooth is taking a damp sponge and smoothing the sponge on the clay. You can also use your fingers, but try not to add too much water to your clay. We don't want the clay to end up soggy and mushy and turning it into slip. Okay, so this is my slab that I've rolled. I'm going to turn it into a tile. The tile can be any shape, but I want the tile to be at the very least, the size of and width of your hand. So I'm just going to trim the edges off. You can use an X-Acto knife. You can also use a fettling knife. And if I want a tile with straight lines, I can use my ruler and cut along the ruler. But I think I'm going to just kind of freehand it, make it sort of like an oval, a more organic shape. I'm just kind of like mapping out with a pin tool what kind of shape I want to have. It's a little bit thicker up here, so I'm not going to use that. Okay, so now I'm going to take either my X-Acto knife kind of going off of my legs a little bit, but that's okay. Now when my tile is cut, I'm going to peel away the clay from the outside. Now, just gently with my finger, what I'm going to do is just kind of smooth out the edges. They're kind of rough. Smooth out those pin tool marks. Okay, so now I have a nice large tile to work with. Smooth. Should be smooth on both sides. Edges should be smooth. No cracks, no lines. Just completely smooth clay. Okay, so this is my tile, and I'm going to give my tile some texture. So I can make texture a number of ways. I can use different tools like this serrated scraper. I could use the back of a pin tool to press in like circular areas. I can use this other skinny dental tool. You can use anything really. You could use jewelry. You could use shells. I'm getting a bag of shells out. So you can use anything that you find in the room. Just make sure when you put the tools away or whatever it is that you're using that you don't leave a bunch of clay built up on the surface. Make sure you clean it off. The other thing that I have that I'll grab real quick are texture rollers, which are like little wooden pieces that have texture on them, and you roll them on the surface. So I'm going to grab those real quick. So here are my texture rollers. They're really awesome. There's some really interesting patterns on them. So I'm going to start, and if you want to, you can take a small chunk of clay and kind of flatten it out first, and then see what kind of texture each tool makes. That way you can kind of plan ahead, and it's not going to be totally random, but maybe it will be somewhat organized. So the texture rollers, you just press gently and then you roll across the clay, and texture is created. My serrated scraper, I could press and scrape, and you can also crisscross your textures or overlap them. You can do whatever you would like to. So I think what I will do is, I'm going to start with this tool, and I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to kind of press and push the clay a little bit this way to make a texture. And you don't want to scrape a lot of clay away or push the clay too much so that the clay tile gets thinner, because then it will have a weak spot in it. But I'm just kind of grazing the surface and pushing the clay a little bit. You do want the texture to be pressed in so that it's not going to be filled in with glaze when we glaze these. So now I'll try some other tools. Like I said, you can also use the back of a pin tool. Try not to press too deep so that you're squishing the clay and making it really thin. But I do want you to leave some smooth areas. So now I'm going to use the other side of the pin tool, which will make tiny little holes. I just realized that perhaps subconsciously I'm making an Easter egg. But maybe not. So just play with textures, you don't have to make anything specific. So all textures, don't add any letters or any writing or anything like that. So we're just making textures. I'm going to press the N and add this texture. So I'm just kind of making my design symmetrical. I'm going to add a little more of these dots. So as you can see, I didn't add any water to my tile, except with a little bit of smoothing if necessary. So don't add any water as you go. You'll probably end up just smoothing over your texture if you do that anyways. Okay. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to punch a hole somewhere at what I would consider the top of my clay tile. So I'm going to take this hole punch for clay, and you can see when I press on it, that metal part pushes in. And so what I'll do is I'll decide where I want the hole. And I'm going to put it right on the clay, straight up and down, and then I'm going to press and twist a little bit. And you can see that a hole was pushed. Because the clay is a little bit soft, I'm going to have to kind of push out the back piece of clay and smooth out the back of the hole. Okay, so I have a hole in it. The last thing that you're going to do for your tile is to give it a slight form. So right now it's a completely flat tile, like a tile on a floor or a tile on a wall. So we're going to give it a little bit of a form, because when we glaze, we will very rarely glaze anything that is flat. So we're going to give it just a little bit of form. So what I'm going to do is take either paper towel or newspaper, and I'm going to get it wet, and then I'm going to crumple it up, and I'm going to prop it up underneath my tile so that it kind of makes a mold for the tile to rest on and to take the form of. So I'm going to get some paper towel. So again, you can do this with anything. It doesn't have to be paper towel. You could even put an object underneath your tile to hold it up. So I've got some soaked paper towel, and I'm going to lift up my tile, and I'm going to kind of bunch up the paper towel and then place it underneath. The hole, though, at the top should be flat against the board. So don't let your hole at the top warp. So I'm going to kind of really warp mine sort of in like a wave formation. So it kind of goes like this. Okay, so now at this point, I would be finished. And if you can be really careful, you can take your stamp, if it's not fired, and you can use it to very carefully press in your initials somewhere on the tile. So I have mine down here at the bottom. Be very, very careful. If you feel like your letters almost fell off, or you while you were carving and you feel like they're really fragile, then you don't have to use this. You can just scratch in your initials for this assignment, and we'll use the stamp on the rest of the assignments. But you should label it so that I know that it's yours.